There exists a kind of creature in this world, discovered by only a few people, but never proven to be real. We call these beings unidentified mysterious animals, or UMA for short. Hello everyone, and welcome to the UMA series. Brazil is the largest country in Latin America, covering about half of the South American continent. Complex historical factors, the influence of multi-ethnic immigration waves, and the fusion with indigenous cultures have shaped Brazil into a multicultural society centered around Portuguese culture. The Amazon River, flowing through northwestern Brazil, has also blessed the country with abundant natural resources. In the rainforest belt, where biodiversity thrives, sightings of creatures beyond human understanding have gradually cloaked this deep green hell with a thick layer of legend. This time, I want to share with you a folk story born from that setting, the legend of a giant worm-like creature from Brazil known as Minhoca. Minhoca is often described as a massive worm-like being with a body covered in hard black scales. It has an upturned snout resembling that of a pig and two moving feelers on its head. Its body length ranges from 65 to 260 feet. The difference in these reported sizes likely comes from exaggeration or visual distortion. According to legend, it hides in rainforest swamps, ambushing livestock such as cows and horses before dragging them underwater to devour them. The creature is said to dig underground tunnels as it moves through swampy regions. These enormous trenches can even alter the course of rivers or destroy local orchards, and its roaring sounds can sometimes be heard from miles away. Some say Minhoca looks more like a giant fish or serpent. The legend of this mysterious creature is widespread, appearing in many Latin American countries such as Brazil, Uruguay, Nicaragua, and Guatemala. According to the article Minio.co of the Guianans, published by the French naturalist Augustin Saint-Hilaire in the Annals of Natural History in 1847, Minhoca is likely a variation of the Portuguese word minhoca, which means earthworm. His guide told him that this creature lived in the state of Goiás, particularly in Parandé-Arandá Lake and Feia Lake. Its form resembled an earthworm, but was much larger, and its mouth was wide and clearly visible, unlike that of an ordinary worm. Normally, it didn't surface, but when hunting, it suddenly broke through the water, tore open its prey's belly, and dragged it to the lake bottom. German biologist Fritz Müller was among the earliest scholars to study the Minhoca phenomenon. He migrated to the Brazilian state of Santa Catarina in 1852 and became a local physician and biologist. While studying crustacean history in his spare time, he noticed a strange local legend about a gigantic worm. The creature was said to be 50 feet long and 5 feet wide, covered in scales, capable of uprooting giant pine trees with ease. The tunnels it dug were said to alter river flows and turn dry lands into endless swamps. Gradually, he began meeting witnesses who claimed to have seen the creature, realizing Minhoca might not be mere legend. In 1877, Dr. Müller presented the materials and findings he gathered about Minhoca in the German magazine, The Zoological Garden. Since the German translation software I have isn't entirely accurate, I used the summary article A New Underground Monster, published in the British Natural Science Journal in February 1878, as the main reference. In that paper, the doctor wrote that around 1869, a man named Francisco Valeré saw a huge creature lying on the bank of the Caveiras River, about 10 kilometers from the town of Lagos. It was nearly 3 feet thick, not very long, with a pig-like snout, though it was unclear whether it had limbs. Valeré didn't dare face the monster alone, but when he called his neighbors to see it, the creature had vanished. As it left behind a deep, trench-like trail. A week later, similar traces were found about 6 kilometers away from Lagos in another direction. These furrows extended to the roots of a large pine tree and led into a deeper swamp area. Also, in the 1,870 seconds, an engineer named Odebrecht, while surveying the road route from Itaja to Santa Catarina, noticed winding trenches across the swampy plains near a tributary of the Marubas River. The internal structure of these trenches was extremely complex, easy to get lost in. At the time, he couldn't imagine the origin of such deep grooves, but now he believes they were made by the mysterious and gigantic Minhoca. According to the report, about 14 years before it was published, in January 1864, a man named Antonio Branco, who lived near the Cacoros River, discovered that the road home had been destroyed. Piles of mud and soil had been thrown up, forming countless winding trenches. The trenches began at a small stream and ended at a swamp, stretching roughly 700 to 1,000 meters in total. From that time on, the stream flowed permanently through this trench. According to Branco and his son, hundreds of people from nearby areas came to see the traces left by the Minhoca. Along the way, several pine trees had been uprooted, one of which had its bark and trunk torn apart by something unknown. One night, in 1849, a man named João dos, who lived near the Papagaio River in the state of Paraná, Brazil, heard what sounded like a heavy downpour outside his home. The sound seemed very close, yet when he looked up, the sky was clear and full of stars. The next morning, villagers discovered that a large section of the opposite hillside had been devastated, covered in deep trenches. These trenches began in a field called Requiado and extended all the way to the Papagaio River. 3 years later, in 1852, a woman named Labino Santos visited the site and found that the trenches and mounds were still clearly visible. After examining them, she concluded that they must have been dug by two creatures, each trench measuring about 2 to 3 meters wide. Mr. Labino later told Dr. Müller that in the same region, many people claimed to have seen the Minhoca. For instance, a black woman who lived nearby once went to fetch water from a lake one morning and found that the lake had been severely damaged. Not far away, she saw a massive creature as large as a house moving slowly across the ground. She immediately shouted for her neighbors to come help, but by the time they arrived, the creature had disappeared, leaving behind deep tracks that stretched all the way to a nearby cliff. It seemed the beast had leapt from there into the deep water below. There was also the case of a young man walking along the road who suddenly saw a huge pine tree collapse beside him. There was no wind and no sign of loggers, yet as he approached, he felt the ground trembling violently beneath his feet. Soon, he discovered the source of the shaking. It was a massive black worm, nearly 25 meters long, with 2 antenna-like feelers on its head. Mr. Labino also mentioned that during his 1849 journey to Arape, Uruguay, he heard of a Minhoca that had died a few miles away. It had been trapped between large rocks and died unable to free itself. Locals said its skin was as thick as pine bark and covered in scales like those of a pufferfish. In the 10th of March, 1866 issue of the Official Gazette of Nicaragua, there was a letter sent by Paulino Montenegro to the editorial office of La Gaceta. In his letter, Montenegro wrote that while traveling to Concordia, Mexico, he had heard rumors of a giant serpent hiding near the village of La Cusia. He and several companions went there and saw traces believed to have been left by the creature. 5 years earlier, in 1861, a flat patch of land had suddenly appeared at the foot of a mountain where a farmer planted several fruit trees. But one day in 1863, the ground suddenly collapsed, revealing a massive stone beneath it. No one could explain the cause since there was no underground spring in the area. Gradually, the trees nearby began to shake. Massive oaks toppled over, and boulders were thrown out of the ground. By December, People tried to block the road between Chichiguasis and North San Rafael, yet the ground was still covered with cracks. When Montenegro arrived at the scene, 3 days had already passed since the last trenches appeared. 2 large tunnels had formed in the earth, and witnesses said they had seen a beast ram an oak tree to the ground, but startled by the sound, it quickly fled. Of the 2 tracks, one led to a nearby lake, while the larger one first cut through about 4 feet of soil and rock before entering the water. Montenegro saw with his own eyes that the roots of trees were polished, smooth, and that a boulder weighing over 1.5 tons had been pushed aside. Based on the traces in the mud, he believed the creature's skin was covered with scales. He estimated that its body could have reached 40 feet in length, 10 feet in height, and 5 feet in width. Locals called the creature Sialpe, which means serpent in Spanish. Many more reports of Minhoca sightings exist, though most come from obscure newspapers or academic essays. For many folklorists, the question of whether this legendary creature truly exists has become a central issue. If Minhoca is merely a personified image of natural phenomena, such as earthquakes, then it represents a strong local form of natural belief, deeply rooted in regional folklore. On the 9th of May, 1887, the famous British biologist Charles Darwin wrote a letter to Dr. Müller. In that letter, he raised the question of whether the so-called underground monster might simply be a product of imagination, born when local people stumbled upon large fossils or skeletons buried in stone. It reminded him of a case along the banks of the Paraná River, where a set of bones had once been mistaken for the remains of a burrowing animal similar to a rabbit or a rodent. Of course, this theory was later rejected by many modern cryptozoologists, as it could not account for the numerous eyewitness sightings. American researcher Chad Armand, writing in the Fortean North American Biology Journal, argued that the creature was far too elusive, perhaps extinct, or perhaps it had never existed at all. But if the Minhoca of legend was merely a myth representing unexplained natural events, then why has it disappeared, and what phenomenon has replaced what people once called the Minhoca? Within the world of cryptozoology, theories about this mysterious being remain sharply divided. French naturalist Augustin Saint-Hilaire, the first to ever mention the Minhoca, wrote in his article that several fishermen had assured him that, though the creature's body was round like an earthworm, it was actually a kind of fish. Dr. Saint-Hilaire believed that a gigantic South American lungfish might be the most reasonable explanation. Since lungfish have long bodies, their eyes can easily be mistaken for nostrils, and the description of moving feelers could have come from their unique paired fins. Furthermore, the lungfish's habit of playing dead and burying itself in mud could explain why the Minhoca was said to tunnel underground. However, the biggest weakness of this theory lies in the idea that the creature was capable of dragging animals underwater, which implies an enormous size and tremendous physical power. While some primitive species of lungfish did have scales, no known specimens have ever reached such massive proportions. The German physicist Emil Bard, in his 1891 book Discussion on Natural Science, wrote that if the creature had no limbs, it must have crawled like a worm. Its scales, he suggested, could have provided the grip it needed to move through the underground soil layers. If its pig-like snout and whiskers were real, they would remind one of certain reptilian species known for similar features. Cryptozoologist Professor Bernard Heuvelmans believed that what Dr. Bard described closely resembled the giant sandworm of desert folklore. Yet he leaned toward the idea that the Minhoca might in fact be a surviving ancient species, Glyptodon, a massive prehistoric mammal. Based on fossils found to date, this creature appeared around 38 million years ago during the late Eocene, and went extinct roughly 11,000 years ago at the dawn of the Holocene. Glyptodon was a close relative of the modern armadillo, but it had a turtle-like shell composed of hundreds of bony plates and short, powerful limbs. The largest known species, Doedicurus, could reach 12 feet in length and stand nearly 5 feet tall. Importantly, fossils of this species have been discovered in several South American countries, including Brazil and Uruguay. In his 1958 book, The Art of Tracking Unknown Animals, Professor Heuvelmans wrote that the Minhoca possessed incredible strength, armed with claws and a thick armored shell. Its massive body, he said, could easily create tunnels large enough to cause sinkholes on the surface. He proposed that Glyptodon might have been amphibious, able to swim across streams or move along riverbeds, and that, in deeper waters, despite its heavy armor, it could inflate its body with air to float to the surface. However, the main issue with this theory is that scientists still debate whether Glyptodon was truly amphibious at all. Even its ability to dig burrows has never been definitively proven. To this day, paleontologists have yet to reach a consensus on the ecological nature of this remarkable ancient species. Cryptozoologist Dr. Karl Shuker disagreed with the Glyptodon theory. He believed that the Minhoca could actually be a giant amphibian belonging to the Caecilian group, also known as blind snakes. This group consists of smooth, elongated, limbless amphibians with tiny eyes, and in some species, no eyes at all. Their bodies are cylindrical with bullet-shaped heads, and more than 200 species are currently known, mainly distributed across the tropical regions of South America, Africa, and Asia. Among them, large species such as Caecilia thompsoni from Colombia can reach up to 5 feet in length, looking remarkably similar to snakes. Dr. Shuker pointed out that Caecilians are common throughout South America, with an appearance similar to that of earthworms, clearly visible mouths, and in some species, flexible sensory tentacles that resemble the whiskers or ears described in Minhoca legends. Moreover, although not easily noticed, Caecilians actually possess tiny hidden scales, and if a gigantic individual existed, it could very well look like the fish monster people described. Additionally, Caecilians are known to attack the bellies of their prey. Therefore, aside from the question of size, they almost perfectly match the description of the Minhoca. This hypothesis was later supported by Professor Heuvelmans, who eventually abandoned his earlier theory regarding the Glyptodon. In truth, after collecting and reviewing all the information I could find about the Minhoca, my personal belief is that the creature might once have truly existed. On the other hand, all reported sightings and traces of the Minhoca date back to the 19th century. Because so much time has passed, no photographs or direct evidence have survived. Yet, as Professor Chad Armand once said, what truly invites reflection is the question of why the Minhoca no longer appears. The Minhoca itself has no connection to any belief, religion, or cultural symbol. Throughout the 19th century, South America was plagued by continuous wars, so it's difficult to argue that the legend was created for tourism or propaganda. More importantly, even before the Cold War era, there were still recorded sightings of similar creatures, giving us reason to believe that some large species may have gone extinct around that time due to warfare, hunting, and habitat destruction, just like the Glyptodon we mentioned earlier. Although modern scholars generally agree that the Glyptodon was one of the giant animals that vanished during the late Ice Age extinction event, new research suggests that prehistoric human hunting might have been the main cause of its disappearance. Therefore, what must be emphasized is a reminder for everyone to begin with themselves, to protect wildlife and preserve the natural environment we share. As for those who take pleasure in hunting, killing, or tormenting animals, let them prepare for their own fate, for evil always brings retribution. As for the truth about the Minhoca, based on the arguments of the scholars mentioned earlier, I will refrain from giving any personal conclusion and leave that mystery to all of you watching. Finally, as I always say, what we do not know will always be greater than what we already know, and that is the true allure of UMA. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next episode.